Thinking about the road to 50? Wondering how developing a spirit of wholeness will maximize our national potential? Pause, think about it with intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear what Rev Angela Palacious got to say about what wholeness will do for our next 50.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. What we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative, 242.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. Join our co-sponsors, Dev Enterprises and Page Investment, and our friends of Something to Think About in this discussion this evening with our special guests. Remember, post your questions, send some comments and suggestions. Let us know you're there because, this whole thing is for you. We're only here trying to share a little bit of nuggets as we go. So that's where we're at. Reverend Palacious, how are you today?
I'm wonderful.
Awesome. But I know Murphy always tries to get in the way when we get people with collars on the neck. But this time it wasn't on your side; it was on my side. So I don't know where he comes from. He always seems to get in the way. Yeah. Well, you have a collar, as I said, and you're a priest in the Anglican Church, and you also have a husband who's a priest. We're going about Jimmy Palacious, and that's plenty pedigree. But then you have a son. I call it a chosen son, and he was a friend of Something to Think About some months back on the show also. And so we welcome you to, as we say, level up, raise the level, because between the two of you all, we had no reason to believe that somebody like Carlos would have been shortchanged in his development, and he did an excellent job. So, I'm not putting any pressure on you, but I know,
Thank God.
where it came from. That means that we're in for a really, really delightful conversation with a lot of nuggets and knowledge pouring out of you.
Came from the Lord. But yes, no, at certain times you begin to follow your children. So he was on before me. So now, yes, I can follow in his footsteps.
Yeah. Good. Well, you have an extensive bio, and what I propose to do is some of those things come out as we go, because we could be here till tomorrow just trying to go through the bio and so forth. But if we start out by saying that right now we're in this mode in the Bahamas where we're on this, what we call the road to 50. We're celebrating our 50th year of anniversary of independence. And in doing so, there's a lot of focus on what has happened over the last 50 years. But I tend to like to stay focused on where we're going and what we need to achieve. And so I would like to focus on the next 50 years and pivot our conversation around what needs to happen and has to happen. And so, but if we just put a little context on that, for the major milestone going back to me would have been majority rule, when there was that movement where we were to get political equality, economic equality, and social equality is the goal of that. And so far, political equality happened in 1967, but economic equality, we are far from that. I don't know if we could even say we're on the radar of getting it at this point in time. And then social, we did a lot of work and we achieved a lot, but that's still a work in progress. And so here at Something to Think About, we believe that what we think we become, what we radiate, we attract, and what we imagine we surely can achieve. And so we like to change the narrative so that action could follow, and then that action leads to productive change. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing this name correct, but Pierre Teilhard de Cardin is credited as saying that we are not human beings having spiritual experiences, but we are spiritual beings having human experiences. What would you attest to his statement there?
Well, I believe that we are definitely body, mind, and spirit, and that we have available to us the Holy Spirit. So, yes, and there we are in this world, so we're having human experiences, but that we can bring a whole depth to that. We're not robots, we're not inanimate objects, we're not just following some kind of instinct, but we have the ability to think, and we have the ability to respond, we have the ability to pray. And so very much spiritual, and having very real human experiences.
Yes, and so those things should then help us to be able to be whatever we refer to the person above as being his greatest agents on this earth to get things done. At least that's the way I look at it. I don't know if you share that view.
I do. We are empowered to accomplish great things, whether it's the newspaper kind of greatness or just within your own spirit, being able to feel good about some of the things you're aiming for and accomplishing. And that has to do, in my mind, with building community, in religious terms, building the kingdom of God. But I see us as building a nation, building communities, building a people, healing homes and helping hearts to be healed. So I see all of us as being in the work of supporting each other on this journey. And that my expression always is they're all our children. And so we can't afford to have our children suffering the way they are for the variety of reasons that they're suffering. So, there's work for us all to do to try and ameliorate the situation that too many of our children are born into. And some of the generations need help to break certain cycles so that we can move beyond where we've come from and look at where we want to be and go and do it together.
Right. Yes, that's awesome. And so we're going to tap into how we're going to do that during the show. And hopefully could get some solutions that people could follow and subscribe to so that they could become more productive and successful in achieving their goals, which hopefully is aligned with the nation's goals and so forth. And so you mentioned body, mind, and spirit. And, I always say that those three things have to be one or be whole together. And the body, we all know, because we spend a lot of time on it and talking about all the physical things of the body and how they interact. And then mind pretty much deals with imagination and memory. And there's a lot of school of thought and teaching and what have you to maximize that. But we tend not to deal with the final stage of the trio, which is spirit. And we tend to either ignore it, dismiss it, or don't pay attention to it to a certain degree, other than when we go to subscribe to a denomination, a church or something, and then, but, I look at that as being religious more so than spirit, because the spirit is there whether we are religious or not. What's your take on that?
Well, while you were talking, I was thinking that because I'm the Anglican hospital chaplain, and so that means I'm in the hospital quite a bit. And you see illnesses that are psychosomatic. It comes from people's emotions and their minds being troubled, and it manifests in their body. But there's spiritual healing that's needed as well. And very often people don't understand the source of their hurt or their pain or of their illness. And I think what we found during COVID was the number of comorbidities that are classified as preventable diseases. And so what you have is, if you have a wounded spirit, for example, I wrote a book called Praying With and For Children. And in it, I did some prayer exercises for how to pray from the moment of your conception, as it were, to go back with the Holy Spirit, with the Lord, to pray for healing from the very moment, depending on how you were conceived, depending on what your mother went through while you were in the womb, what it was like for her delivery, what it was like for you in those first months and years. So I find that there's wounding that has taken place from the very beginning. You knew that you weren't wanted. You heard the angry voices. You felt your mother's sadness and grief, and if particularly you were conceived through violence, and all of that can wound a person's spirit. And we need to help people to heal. We need to help them to be able to learn how to forgive, although certain justice needs to still be done, but how to set themselves free from unforgiveness, from the bitterness and anger and resentment that can destroy them on the inside. So we have work to do, because there are levels of hurt, and there's levels of low self-esteem. There are generational cycles of persons passing on certain woundedness, and we have to be able to help people to be set free, to empower them to know that they can take control over certain things. And if they really cannot, then to get help, that there is help available to allow you to go back into the past and work certain things through.
Yeah. And so, and then mentioning that just now, then it made me think of it, that really and truly, when we go to visit people in the hospitals and stuff, we see people who, black, white, brown, yellow, whatever. Then we have male and female, rich and poor. We have the religious, the non-religious, and so forth. And you mentioned the spirit of all of these persons. And so really and truly, it's independent of all those things. And so because you may not be rich or a certain denomination or whatever, it doesn't mean that you're not subjected to the benefits and the downfalls as to what attacks or what promotes you from your spirit's point of view.
Right.
Is that your experience?
I believe, well, I start out from the premise of everybody being made in the image and likeness of God. Everybody being made with gifts and talents of various kinds. Everybody to have self-worth and self-esteem. And of course, from the spiritual side, the religious side, Christ dying on the cross is automatically, for me, a sign of God's love that's inclusive. And so how to help people to love, for me, love the Lord, but love their neighbor and love themselves. And so a lot of the journey is helping people to value who they are and who they can become, and how to praise and thank and encourage and speak to each other with tact and diplomacy, with courtesy, speaking truth in love. Just the way we handle one another is so important, because we bruise and wound each other's egos. And then people go home and they take that anger and hurt that they didn't express at work, and they take it home and act out in the home. And then the children take that to school and act out in the school, or it's acted out in the street, or even how people drive. You know, there's so much that needs to be done to help persons to have a whole and healthy spirit. And we're all in this together. We can all do it. Whether we are religiously affiliated or not, we all have work to do, because we're one family as a nation.
Yes. And you know, you saying that just now reminded me when I was coming here to the studio to do the show. I was at the junction, which at the Marathon Mall and Robinson Road junction, and somebody was coming, and you know, it's like 4 or 5 lanes, and they decided that they were going to go from lane number 2 straight over to lane number 6 or whatever that, and the people were blowing the horn, and they had no care for the other cars. They just, if you stayed there, they would have rammed you out the way, you know. And when I was growing up, which was only a couple of years ago, that really didn't happen. You know, it was everything is relative, you know where we go.
Well, I think there's a level of selfishness that is creeping in. We did begin to have the philosophy that you got to look out for yourself and you'd have to take care of number one. And that began to be something that you would hear. People had posters, you know, bumper stickers. And I think we have to get back to, yes, we have to be able to celebrate ourselves and appreciate our own need for a life that's sufficiently independent and interdependent, but we also are a community. We also have to look at the greater good. And so if that particular person thought about the inconvenience that you're causing, because very often the light will change and then you get stuck for another red light, or just the possibility of an accident. Particularly, don't let it be that the person looked away or, heaven forbid, looked at their phone or something dropped or talked to the children in the back or whatever, and didn't even see that this car is going to be doing something like that. Then you could have had a major accident. And so we need to think about other people. When you stop in the middle of a one-way street, block the whole thing, have a lengthy conversation, and you have the gall to look annoyed when people 5 and 6 cars down start blowing. Pull on the side, and very often there is space on the side. Just pull on the side. Think about the flow of traffic. And so that's what we have to work on in our homes and in our schools, helping our children so we raise a new generation with a higher level of sensitivity to communal growth and development and camaraderie and what it is to look out for your neighbor, in inverted commas, whoever that neighbor is.
Yeah. And then the comment you made just before that one also, you said everybody's created in his likeness, etc. And part of that statement, if I remember right, is that we are all born unique. And so to me that would tell me that our body type, our mind, and our spirit are all unique. And so I would think we need to identify our spirit and also be able to figure out how to apply that. And so tell us then, for somebody to be able to do that, what specifically is spirit? Because I said what mind and body was, and everything else is spirit. That's the way I define it. But is there a formal definition of it?
Well, for me, of course, a healthy spirit involves a relationship with God. I mean, it's obvious that that's where I would come from. Prayer and meditation and worship and scripture. But it's also an experience of love, the laughter, the playfulness. I think that the spirit is that inner person. And as I've said, it reflects who God is, and God is love. And so how to raise children with a healthy spirit, I think, has to do with the way we love them and the way we teach them to love. So if you are needing to use tender love in this particular situation, but you have to be a little tougher in another situation, because we cannot spoil our children in the name of loving them, but we can give them boundaries, and we can lead by example, and we can give them clear instructions. We can give them rewards, and we can give them the consequences that Mrs. Muriel Eneas, one of my godmothers, would say. They're only consequences. So the consequence is a reward or a punishment, but the intention of the punishment is to be a deterrent, but it can be appropriate. For example, one evening when we went out, we left our son to wash dishes. When we came back, he was in bed, the dishes weren't washed. So there was no need to row or beat or carry on. My husband just woke him up, let him wash his dishes. He went back to bed. We never had to deal with that again. And so there are times when you can help people to learn from experience. I give another example. When I do laundry, you fold the towels a certain way because of the racks being as they are. You have to fold it a certain way for it to fit well. Well, one time, my husband normally does the folding. I do the laundry. So he was folding, and I said to him, oh, you have to fold the towels like this. And he said, well, why? What's the difference? I said, okay. I left it at that. So then the next time we were changing towels, I said to him, oh, sweetheart, would you put up the towels, please? Of course, he then learned why you can't fold it like a square. It has to be a right rectangle because it isn't going to fit. But I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to row. I just let him have the experience of why it was wiser to have folded it in the first place the way I was suggesting. So if we can allow people to learn from experiences that are appropriate, again, we don't want them to fall in a hole, to break their leg, to learn that you don't walk in hole. But in ways that we can do without it being detrimental to the person's physical health, as it were, or emotional health, but that we just give them an opportunity to discover the truth that you are trying to share if they didn't get it the first time, if they're not following your thinking. then you give them an opportunity. As we would say to Carlos, we want you to learn how we think so that you can think for yourself and come to certain conclusions when we are not around. But it isn't because we say so. But this is our logic, so that he could begin to at least understand that we had a reason for why we did what we did. And so then we would encourage him to experiment with that reasoning and see if it worked for him. Sometimes if he had a better way, we'd say to him, as long as you speak to us respectfully, just tell us whatever's on your mind. Ask us any question, whatever, because we can learn from him. Well, now, of course, there's so much to learn from him as a mature man. But wanting to give him a chance as he grew to become independent in his thought, and yet able to depend on God and depend on us if he needed our wisdom to come alongside whatever he might not know. So that just gives you an example in my mind of how you help persons to develop, so that you give them freedom within limits, but you also are respecting their spirit and their right to be an individual, and how to praise them when they do well and then correct them when they do wrong. And we are not beating parents. He had one little spank one time, and that was just so we could make the point, because we gave him a choice, either have a little spank or Miss Junkanoo. Well, he chose to get the spank. He didn't think through that one of us would have to miss Junkanoo too. So he chose. And so what made it so interesting, he wasn't used. He was about 6, I guess. And I had to keep a straight face. In fact, I had to turn away. He said to his daddy, "Is it going to hurt?" And Jimmy said, "That's the whole point." But one little tap, he was already in tears, just like his mother would have been. "Don't ruffle my feathers, don't ruffle his." And that was it. We never had to touch him again. You call his name, you give him a look, you call his name. That's all he needed. And then, you took away certain privileges or you did certain things, but we didn't have to, we do not believe. We think there are other ways to convince a child to change their behavior. But we believe, of course, you have to have effective parenting. So if you're having a challenge, then you need to get some help. But I don't think beating is the way to raise a child. That's my position anyway.
Yeah, well, I share that because I didn't. I could probably count the amount of times that it actually happened.
On one hand, and spanking, not beating either.
Yeah.
A little tap here and there.
Yeah, if I remember right, the laws of the land say you could give a swift tug or whatever you call it, but it doesn't talk about multiple blows or hits or whatever.
Oh, okay. I didn't even know that we had something. Well, Mommy was principal at St. Anne's Primary School for almost 25 years, but had taught at Southern Senior, Western Junior, etc. She was from Bermuda, but she married my father in 1949. And the bottom line was that I saw her using her little cane as the principal, but I also saw her learning why children behaved the way they did, what was going on in their home, doing home visits. There were no social workers or guidance counselors in those days. And she would go and to find out what is happening. Why is this child acting out like this? And very often you then discover that there's something going on. I taught primary school, 4th. I went into 5th. I got a new 5th. And one day, one of my boys came with his eyes all puffy, and I could see he had been traumatized. And so I took him aside. I said to him, "What happened? What happened?" He said, Daddy came home drunk the night before and started raising his voice and throwing things. And the mommy and the children, everybody had to run out in the road in their night clothes, and he was exhausted. So that particular day, I taught with my hand on his shoulder till he fell asleep. I gave him an hour or 2 to sleep. And then when he woke up, he was fresh enough to learn something. I also warned the children. I said, "Now you see, he's obviously," I didn't give them the details, but I said, you could see he's having a hard time. Do not tease him during the break, because I knew he had a bad temper. I said, do not tease with him. Don't mess with him. Let him catch himself. Be a good friend to him. Don't antagonize him. And that was my way of trying to protect him from the violence that he was obviously living with and the experience. And so, we tried to make contact with certain professionals to see what help was available. But that's the sensitivity we all have to bring. Rather than just yelling at children and carrying on, we need to find out, what is it that's happening? Why are they choosing this behavior? And usually it's from some deep hurt or trauma that has been going on in their lives. and we have to help them to learn how to cope. When I was in Governor's Harbor, I established 6 ALA teen groups, and there was 8 students in the group, 6 teachers with a group of 8 students, and they met once a week at lunchtime. And the ALA teen is for teenagers who are living with an out of control adult because of alcohol or drugs. So we were trying to teach them how to cope with the roller coaster of living with an adult with an addiction, so that they would not do desperate things, but they would learn how they could control as much as they could at their age what seemed to be uncontrollable. And of course, that required reporting them sometimes to home, to social services or whatever, but just to give the children backup so they wouldn't act out in school and not know why they're behaving the way they are.
Yeah. So to do all of that, then that tells me then, and we have a challenge in somewhat for you to speak on that. So how does our spirit then drive us to change? Because I mean, we talk about body. The body doesn't really cause us to change. And the mind, we could override and we could walk across the street in front of a car knowing that we're not supposed to. Our mind could cause us to do that. But sometimes, like, I remember running from some dogs one time when we was taking some things out of a tree which we weren't supposed to take after school.
Really?
And
really not
it was
to
only about 4 foot odd, and the fence was like 6 foot, and everybody was much bigger than me, and they were struggling to get over the fence, but I cleared the fence clear. Obviously, that was not, my mind didn't tell me to clear the fence, or the body didn't say I could jump that high, but some caused me to jump that high. So tell us a little bit about how we use those intangibles to become successful.
Okay. There are many different ways, but let me take this particular route. If we begin to instill in our children a spirit of integrity, then it means that you begin to understand that you want to be honest, that you want to be generous, you want to be helpful. That integrity has to do with lining up how you think, what you say, and what you do. And so that's why it's so detrimental for a parent to say, tell the landlord I'm not here. And very often the child will say, well, mommy says she ain't here. Because in their innocence, they don't know that they're supposed to be cloaking someone's behavior. So if we want our children to be honest, we have to model honesty. So we are shaping their spirits in order for them to respond to the world in a particular way. We want them to learn to be kind. And so we have to teach them how to be kind. I often say to mothers, you may say to your children, oh, you don't have to buy me anything. You don't have to do anything for my birthday. I said, maybe you don't want to have them spend money, but they need to learn how to give. They need to learn how to celebrate. They need to learn how to be grateful. And a lot of times in marriage, I find that if the husband is not giving the wife any special attention and treatment, particularly on special occasions, it should be consistent for both loving each other that way, but particularly on special occasions. And very often it's because he was not required to do that in his home. And so I encourage people to teach our children how to be the human beings, and for me, the Christian, that we want them to be by example and instruction. So they can see this is what it is like. This is how you handle this kind of situation. Even if you are angry, you do not act out your anger in inappropriate ways. And so I work with people to deal with not only anger management, but also the creative expression of anger, so that you can feel it and not pretend that you're not angry. But this is an appropriate way to express it. You exercise, you listen to music, you cook, you read, you tidy drawers, you do whatever it is, because emotion is energy, to get that energy out. And then you strategize. How am I going to handle this situation when it occurs again? How can I keep from feeling so deeply about this? What am I thinking and feeling? So I'm angry, and in the session I had with Dr. Harry Ferret today, when we were talking about the perpetrator counseling program, was so helpful, because he said, what we try to do is get persons to own their feelings, admit their feelings, and then say to themselves, you know, when you do so-and-so, I feel so-and-so. And you say it to the other person. And so if you speak to me like that, I'm going to have to hang up, was one of his examples. I'm going to have to hang up, or I'm going to have to leave the room, because when you speak to me like that, I feel disrespected. And so as we begin to recognize our emotions and feelings, and then we articulate it to people, we then determine how do we want to act as a result of those feelings. So you may need to withdraw for a while and have some quiet time to catch yourself, calm down, think through why are we so angry, and then decide, how can I diffuse this on another occasion? I tell you the truth, I have some ways that I have coped over the years. Particularly, I was a teacher's daughter, and there was pressure there. I became a teacher, pressure there. I was a priest's wife, pressure there. I became a priest. So at no point are you legitimately allowed to misbehave like other people think they can. And so I had to learn some coping skills in order to have self-respect and self-esteem in the midst of situations where you can't get crazy like the other person. And so one of the things that I cultivated was what I call the Mona Lisa smile, which means I'm not going to answer you. You don't know what I'm thinking. I'm going to have a pleasant demeanor, but I am not going to let you goad me into behavior that I will regret. So that's very much something that I've tried to do. Or when we had set situations, Jimmy and I would decide, this is the answer we are going to give. For example, when are you going to have the second child? When there's all of this pressure of people in your business, there's nothing to do with them. And so we had a set answer as to how we wanted to respond, so that we were both on the same page, but we were in control of the situation and not allow ourselves to get so annoyed or irritated that you answer in a way that you have to apologize. That is my position in life. Try not to have to apologize if you can help it, by trying to do the right thing from the beginning, at least the right thing for me. Somebody else may handle it in another way, but I need to be able to feel good about myself and feel and pray that the Lord is pleased. So because I have that highest authority now, beyond teacher and priest, highest authority of pleasing God, there's certain boundaries and limits I try to put on myself so that I don't have to regret how I handle something. So to me, the spirit is that side of a person that you are cultivating, to me, that reflects God. And so you are bringing out the fruit of the spirit: love, joy, peace, goodness, kindness, faithfulness, meekness, patience, self-control. Those kinds of abstract qualities, to me, makes up the spirit. And we're trying to nurture and feed the part that is positive and healthy.
Awesome. That's a mouthful, and enough for people to just sit down and meditate on that by itself. And so what we'll do right now is we will just take a break, so let that simmer in some minds, and then when we come back, we'll dive down deeper into some of the avenues as to how we will become totally whole in this whole process. You're watching Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles, and we're here with Rev Angela Palacious. And as you see, where all of the smarts is coming from that icon of a family that they have. We'll be right back.
Behind every scoop, lick, and savor is a smile and memory being made or reminisced. Whether you're at work, out with family on a Sunday, or have friends visiting, flavor will meet expectations in our 32-ounce container for only $10 if you're having a special event as well. Exotic flavors ranging from soursop to Guinness is definitely worthwhile.
Welcome back to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. We're here this evening talking with the Rev Angela Palacious. You know, you got to put a double name in there when you get two of them in the same set, same name. So just so people know exactly who we're speaking to today. But, and, you know, we're talking about becoming whole in a way. So, and we're going to dive into that as we go right now, because we wanted to set that foundation as to what we mean, because sometimes I think people just miss the fact when we say the spirit, or we say the devil made us do this or make that, and all kind of stuff that really is counterproductive to it. Because one of my favorite verses is being what I call hung by the tongue. You know, life and death is in the power of the tongue. And so we sometimes say things that cause us to not be able to be as successful as we can. And so when we talk about being whole, we want to touch on a lot of those things. But before we do that, Reverend, let's do what I didn't do at the beginning of the show, because we want to congratulate a friend of Something to Think About, who is now His Excellency Paul Andy Gomez, who will now be taking up a residency in the UK to represent the Bahamas on our initiative as a diplomat. He served before in China, but he was on our show, and so we like to just highlight people who are on the show when they do great things, have an opportunity to do great things, because that's what I told him that we're going to expect to come from him as we move forward. And so we tip our hat to him. And we also tip our hat to my mom, who we congratulate for 70 years of nation building through girl guiding. I don't even 70 yet, so I don't know how I could even wrap my mind around what that window of time is to be doing something like that. But
wonderful.
That's just
yes
wild to just think about that. And then finally, we've made it, and I say we made it because you are on the 100th episode of Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles.
Wonderful.
And I remember when we started this, the question was whether we were going to make it past the month.
That's
and
awesome.
Now we're on 100, right?
Congratulations.
So we're really pleased.
My privilege to be with you.
To join us today.
Yes, indeed.
On these shows and give us all of this nice nugget of knowledge. Because in our society today, people always talk about two things. The children don't know how to do conflict management. And then it seems like there's a breakdown in the family learning process. Where you talked about a village earlier. I think you used the word community, but pretty much the same thing. And so forth. So as we move into this segment, then tell us then, what must we do? What I should say is, how do we now develop the spirit of wholeness so that we can maximize our potential?
I have so many thoughts triggering by things you've said. So let me begin with your comment about the power of the tongue. And I believe that we can begin with looking at how we love ourselves. Do I really like myself? Do I really respect myself? Do I believe in myself? And we have to have people to help nurture you and to create that kind of healthy self-respect. But then words of affirmation that I think we can teach our children, but that we can use as adults who may have been wounded from early, may not have been parented in the best way possible. And so we need to be able to counter some of the negativity that was used to control our behavior. Let us say persons that had that as their experience. To say, I am a unique individual. I am wonderfully made. My inner beauty is even more important than my outer beauty. I am a person of integrity. I can solve problems. I can manage my anger. I can resolve conflicts. That as we say those things and we begin to live into them, there's a 5th grade well, we're going to make it a 5th grade program this year, but if we did it in 6th in St. Anne's, and we did it in 5th and 6th at EP Roberts. So it's a pilot program called Power Up that Dr. Novia Carter Lukey wrote for the Anglican Diocese. That's made up of 12 components, and it's 12 weeks, and it's a 40-minute session during school time. We did it at lunchtime in one, and class time or guidance time in the other. And what we are teaching in that curriculum is goal setting, is decision making, is conflict resolution, is the building of integrity and identity and self-esteem, is effective communication. Then the drug unit comes, the police come in and talk about gangs and things, and then there's a special session on vaping, which is very popular now. And so what we try to do at 5th grade and 6th grade is to get children prepared for 7th and 8th and what's going to come. And in fact, some of the programs can be started, other people are doing for even younger children, so that you begin in your home to speak in a particular way, so that children begin to think in a particular way, and hopefully they'll behave in a particular way. But the Power Up program, we are now expanding. We hope to be in 4 more schools in New Providence, and we've contacted principals in Exuma and Abaco, Eleuthera, and Grand Bahama. So we'll do a Family Island pilot, and then hopefully make it nationwide, so that, and Turks and Caicos is a part of our Anglican diocese, so if they are open to it as well. But the idea is to give our children as much support and encouragement to want to be whole, to understand, just as you were saying, what is wholeness? What does that feel like? What does that look like? What does that sound like? And to have people who can model that around them. And that's why I mentioned, I think, the parenting program on Thursdays at 5:30, that's virtual. If parents will take that program and begin to learn about aspects of journeying, of effective parenting, of dealing with their own emotions. And forgiveness is a big area that we all need to learn in terms of wholeness, so that we can make peace with what we cannot change, but we can try and prevent certain things from happening because we know that we deserve better, and how to walk away from certain relationships, not get into certain relationships, look for the red flags, recognize them, and understand that if you're not speaking the same emotional language with the person, maybe you cannot expect from them a particular treatment. They don't know how to handle situations in a particular way. You need to protect yourself. So we're wanting to enlighten our children early to what this wholeness could look like. And then we want parents to be one step ahead of their children in that regard. And then we want perpetrators to be helped to face their situation and deal with it. So we are trying in as many different ways as possible. This is the Anglican Diocesan Family Violence Ministry that I chair. We're trying in as many different ways as we can to do just what you're asking, to have a holistic approach to the develop of the body, mind, and spirit. Because the body will let you know when the spirit is troubled. The body will let you know. Indigestion, acne, sinusitis. There are lots of different aches and pains, things to do with digestion, that everything gets bound up or everything gets opened up. It depends on what's going on in your mind and in your spirit. Your body does react and let you know you have trouble. And that's why you need to pay attention to those signs and find out what is going on in my body. And very often it's a signpost to what is going on in your mind or your spirit. So mental health is extremely important at this time, spiritual health and physical health.
Right. And so while you was saying that, I was thinking then, because the question I was going to ask then is, what is wholeness? So if we listen to what you just said and spin it back to ourselves, because, one of the things I always tell people, if you want to understand or if figure out whether you learned something, is to try to teach it. And then you would know if you learned it. If you can't teach it, then obviously you're still missing something, and so forth. So when we ask the question as what is wholeness, then are we saying then that when our body, mind, and spirit comes together and we're in a state of peace, then that could be defined as wholeness?
That's a part of it. That's a part of a very important part of it, that peace and that joy. And so, what I classify as self care at times has to do with paying attention to all these aspects, your relationships, how you socialize, all of these things are integrated. And so, to know your strengths, what do I do well? Know your weaknesses. Where do I have to avoid temptation? What activities do I enjoy? Am I engaging in them? Or is it I can't remember when? The last time. Are these activities good for me? Because you like it, but it may not be good for you. And how to be able to respect yourself, to say, I will require respect from others. Do I surround myself with people who care for me, are encouraging and inspiring me? Who are they? And can I have more persons supporting me in that way? I will not tolerate abuse. I will protect my health. I will pursue my goals and dreams by strategizing. And I will start today. I will learn to relax, to reflect on nature, listen to music, take quiet walks. So how to be your own best friend is extremely important. How to learn to be alone, to be in the quiet. So you don't always have to have people all around you and bang, clang a line to try and block out the thoughts. You have to go into the thoughts. And if you need somebody to journey with you, then do that. That's what spiritual counseling is about. That's what spiritual direction is about. There are psychologists. There are many different types of persons who can journey with you depending on what you need. But the key is to be able to be comfortable with yourself so that you enjoy who you are. You like who you are, and you love yourself in a healthy way. When your cup is full like that, it spills over into other people. I mean, they can see it shining in your eyes. They can see it in your smile. They can see it in the warmth of the tone of your voice, the helpfulness of your hands, because who you are is now this person who is integrated with my mind, with the Holy Spirit, influencing your spirit. And then you come to reflect God more and more on your journey. Never perfect, but seeking to be more holy and more whole, because holiness and wholeness comes from the same root.
Okay. And one time ago, I led a division where we had some 350 odd people, employees. And one of the things I like to do is to walk around, and I learned this from Robert I. Bartlett, and get a feel for what the workers or the employees was experiencing. And I'd sit and talk with some of them for different days just to find out what was going on. And I normally would ask my administrative assistant to tell me who were the performers and who were not the performers. And so I would go and particularly pull out some of the non-performers and try and find out what obstacles that I could take away that will help them do their jobs better.
Excellent.
And I found a lot of the time that it really wasn't an obstacle of the work. It was more an obstacle of something happening in their life.
Yes.
And so when I look at that and you talk about wholeness, and like I told you on Sunday that, your sermon touched home because a lot of that flashed back to me. When I look at the wholeness of a lot of these people, and I'm thinking that they're not whole in their makeup, let's put it that way, so that they're not given the mouth production as to what they could be given. And then I translate that up to a nation level, and if we have a high percentage of persons who are not whole, then as a nation we really aren't producing what we can produce. And we always hear about the people like to point to the civil service, but that's only one aspect of society. I think that same thing applies all over.
Everywhere. And the opposite of wholeness is brokenness. So many of us are dealing with lots of broken pieces that we've never been able to put back together again. And I don't believe that we're Humpty Dumpty. I believe that God can put us back together. Yes, we may be scarred, but we're also wiser, and we can against other people because we understand with compassion how you can get yourself into certain situations. It's so easy to judge. Well, how could you do that? How did you unless you've been there, you have no idea how it is that certain people get backed into certain corners, and desperate people do desperate things. So I do believe that we have to to me, pray for wisdom and pray for God's revelation so that we have a vision for our people. We have a mission for us, but we also have each family to have a vision statement and a mission statement. This is who this family is. This is what we are working towards. And I think families should have some ground rules. This is how we speak to one another in this family. This is how we treat one another. This is the way we conduct ourselves in this family. And of course, the parents can't give what they don't have. So hence the parenting classes, 12 weeks. If you miss one, you can pick it up in a couple of weeks. It'll be coming cyclical. There's only one break between the cohorts. 5:30 on a Thursday, it's virtual. And so how to help enable parents in particular, but adults to understand how to mentor and groom and nurture their children, but also how to empower children if they are being spiritually neglected, to know how to begin to minister to themselves so that we can move toward a whole people. Never perfect, but always seeking and understanding where we have issues and how to deal with those issues so that we can get better results than we've been getting. It all works together, I do believe. But we have to have some kind of insight. So that's why people who study behavioral sciences and who understand emotions and spiritual direction, we need to be together having conversations. How do we minister to people's needs and how do we make it available? So just as your program is going to be on YouTube and Facebook, so people who want to listen, and there are others who are wiser than I am in many areas, so you can study and learn about how these things work. And that gives you power to take more control over your own destiny.
Right. And so when we look at that then, for those persons like who would have been, I might have approached on the job or other places in other environments, etc., might not be as productive as they know that they can be or wish to be, then how would they go about identifying? Because sometimes people don't see what it is that is actually.
You know, I went to a conference in Hawaii, and one of the speakers, it was a Christian conference, but but they were all almost like millionaires. And this particular woman worked on Wall Street. And she said that she would go in, and she had been in, Fortune 500 and whatnot. She said that she would have a conversation, just like you were saying, with each employee in her company. She would make time to interview them, and she would say to them, how happy are you in the work you're doing? And how can we help you if this is not your dream job? How could we help you to fulfill your dreams? And she said she found that sometimes people were just working for a year or more, looking forward to doing something else. So she'd say to them, well, I tell you what, you give me 100% of yourself for this year, and I will make sure that you have what you need to move in the direction you want to go. So if you need to talk to HR about how to handle staff, I will give you an opportunity to learn from them. They're hiring and whatnot if you want your own business. Whatever it is that you want, I will help you to achieve what you want. But I also want you to let me achieve what I want. And she said that the productivity went sky high because not only did people feel seen and heard, but they had their dreams now, as it were, confirmed and appreciated, and some level of approval, although we don't need to wait for that. But what they did was that they felt themselves affirmed. And she said it made all the difference to legitimize other people's dreams, that everything was not about making money for her. It was about them being fulfilled. And so if we can do that, give people the right to want to be who they need to be, and we support them in whatever way we can. So when I speak at schools, they ask me to speak to teachers or whatever, I will say to them, if this is the only year you're going to be teaching because you've resolved this is not your calling, give it your all, make it your best year. But begin. If you need to go online and just look up studies, if you need to talk to somebody in business, that was one of the things that my son did, Carlos. He would have lunch with anybody who he had admired, and they were willing to have lunch with him. He would take them to lunch and talk to them, say, how did you do this? How were you able to be successful with these challenges? And he has a teachable spirit. That's what I admire so much about him. He has a teachable spirit. There's some people who, when they accomplish certain things, they believe they know everything, or they see it as humbling or humiliating to let somebody teach you. But you never know everything. And there's always somebody that has a different handle on something. You can reject it or accept it, but you need to hear. And so I believe in people doing courses, reading certain books, going online, using whatever means you can to give you more ideas, give you more support, so that you can then be wiser than you were yesterday. And not only wiser, but more educated as well. Because sometimes we have facts and figures, but we're not wise. The wisdom comes with the application of what you're learning.
Right. And so when we look at that then, yeah. So when we look at, say, you mentioned some things earlier, excuse me, on people being broken. So I look at things like lockdowns and so forth that I'm not necessarily would say that person broke people, but it disrupted and caused people to be out of sync, and they might not have been able to sync back up to be as productive as they were before now. So what would you say across the spectrum, not just the last 2 years, some of the challenges that we have where people, where if we were more whole as a people, we would be able to succeed better at?
Well, I did the COVID contact tracing course, but they asked me, rather than do medical follow-up, to do prayer follow-up. So one particular day, I had 40 people to call and pray with. And what I found was that a lot depended on how you are prepared to deal with crisis, and whether you've been through something and survived, because that's a great help as well. For those for whom it was the first time they had met adversity, it was much harder. Those who have their little battle scars know, well, okay, if God brought me through or I made it through, then I could do this again. But what I found, for example, was how do you distract yourself from the negative? So I would say to people who have a lockdown, I mean, if you lock down with a crazy person, you're in plenty of trouble because you can't go to work or school to get away. But to say to them, okay, you're in this room, you're in isolation. Some people had their young babies crying on the outside of the door. I mean, very traumatic. And so some had their children cooking for them, which was another trauma. But I'd say to them, okay, you're in this room. What can we do to help you entertain yourself while you're in this situation? Have you always wanted to do a business plan? Do it now. Have you wanted to learn a language? Do it now. Whatever it is you could do. I say to some of the ladies, I said, now try on all the clothes in your closet. Whatever you think you're unlikely to get in again, pack it up, share it with somebody. Things that need to be rag, put in the rag bag. Accessorize, try on all your jewelry, get all these new outfits ready for when you come out. Just trying to help people to find what I call the silver lining in the dark cloud, so that you could pass your time doing something profitable. I say, you have old people in your life, call every last one and pray with them and see how they're doing. Single parents, anybody you know, persons with disability, differently abled, anybody who you think would appreciate a call them. Somebody who's living by themselves and alone, or they're on lockdown by themselves. Call each other and cross-pollinate. And so the idea was to build up people's spirits so they could find some joy in their situation and make it work. There's some I had to call and I'd say, look, this person can't seem to get a negative. What is going to happen? One man, he was trying to get back to an island. He had 5 weeks and he still couldn't get a negative. They had to write a letter because they said sometimes the dead cells in the body keep you from you just keep getting a positive. So they had to work with him. But there were other people, when you're not working, you don't get paid. And so their stress level was because they got bills piling up and they can't work. And so how to keep them encouraged while they were in lockdown was a great part of my ministry, because you couldn't go to hospital. You had certain restrictions on certain things that I would normally have done. So I did a lot. I do still only virtual counseling and things like that. But in terms of people and their spirit, how to find out, okay, what do they bring to the table? What kind of level of humor do they have? One of the things that I suggested was that you make, and I did it when I had a season when mommy died and the house burned down and the car got stolen and daddy lost his sight and got a little depressed because he couldn't drive anymore, sight in one eye to be able to drive. All these things were happening. The dog went to the vet and died. And then I was to have surgery. And Carlos was about 8. He said, Mommy, are you going to die too? I couldn't tell him no. I said, well, mommy's young, mommy's strong. They do this kind of surgery all the time. But what I did was I wrote a letter to my son, to my husband, and my father, letting them know how I felt about them. And I left it where they could find it in case I didn't make it. I also went through everything in the house to organize and tidy. And I said to my husband, in case I have a lengthy recovery, this is how I file things. This is where I keep this. This is how I do this. Because if I died, I did not want him having the trauma of not knowing where anything was that was my role and responsibility in the house. And so how to prepare people to cope with things that are out of their control, but they can bring their best self to it. Things to read, things to pray, music to listen to. And so I had created a book. It was one of those photo albums that had pockets. And I found that an index card, 3x5, could fit in it. And so I wrote scriptures, I wrote jokes, I put letters that people wrote to me, photographs. I still have it. I know where it is. I haven't had to use it for years, but it's there if I need it. And it was my own source of encouragement and spiritual upliftment when I went through all of that, because all of that was within like a 2-year period. And my daddy's twin sister died. She had already started going to speaking engagements with me, like mommy would have done. And then she had a stroke and died. So I lost godparents. All kinds of things were happening to me. But what I saw it as, this was now my time of testing. So by the time we got into COVID, I had been through enough things earlier on in my life that I could help other people. I was no longer going through it for the first time. I already knew that God was faithful. I already knew the scriptures that helped me, and songs and books and other resources that I could share with other people, because God had strengthened me in my time of weakness to then be a support to someone else.
Awesome. So we know about the spirit of 76. You hear things like that. And we also hear them talk about the spirit that was in the slaves that came across the Atlantic is what kept them going, and so forth. And there's always these different things that people reference it in maybe different words or the like. But when we look at that whole picture, and you talked earlier when we talk about body, mind, and spirit, when we're trying to accomplish and become whole, are they balanced in terms of, like when you see the chart with equality versus equity, is one more influential in causing success than the other?
Well, I would, of course, think that the Spirit, because I believe that it would be in communion with the Holy Spirit, that the Spirit of God within us, that makes all the difference. Because I believe as you love God first as the umbrella, then you learn how to love your neighbor, you learn how to love yourself, so that your mind can be focused and disciplined. You can have resilience, you can have a sense of determination. I'm sure that's what, for the slaves who made it, I'm convinced it had to be some kind of almost a stubborn will to survive, as opposed to those who ended it because they just could not see themselves facing that unknown future, or having, their unborn child face it. So they chose to handle their situation in that way. And then there are others who, for some reason, had that sense of, I'm going to push through this, get to the other side. But we have no idea what wounding they came with, because many of them had been slaves in Africa, or at least they had been kidnapped and abducted. So we have no idea where they were on that whole spectrum of spiritual strength. And so it's not for us to judge. It's horrific, beyond our understanding. And so we have to look at what it is that enabled people to endure for that length of time. But we also have to recognize what of the negativity still pervades our society today. How do we counter whatever it is that we inherited, whatever it is that being in that level of oppression and degradation, what does that do to the human spirit? And how do we undo that? How do we work against that? That's where we all have to be together in dialogue and conversation to see what do we each bring to the table and how can we help our people to rethink certain values, to espouse what I would call Christian principles, whether they are Christian or not in their faith, but that there are certain aspects of character that we want to espouse as a people. And that those are the values, core values and principles that we want to teach so that people can develop fidelity in relationships, just being faithful to one person. That takes courage and stamina when you believe that, the whole idea is to just have a good time and move around and say, well, the males were studs and this and that, and the women had to sleep with whoever wanted to. We have to come against that. That's a demonic attack on our ability to be faithful in committed and devoted and dedicated to one relationship. And I would tell people when I do early counseling, date one person at a time. Don't be juggling like you got several pots on the stove. I remember one time I was so distressed. I went to a fellow at a party and I said, I congratulations, I hear you got engaged. He said, shh, I got 2 other women who don't know. They think I'm getting engaged to them. And I said, really and truly, I mean, I was young then. I said, you should be ashamed of yourself. I said, how could you string all these people along? Surely you should know that this is the one. And this person has the qualities. You let them free to go and have a life and have somebody to love and cherish them. And so words in the marriage ceremony like honor and cherish and forsaking all others and all of those kind of things that talk about the support and the care and the dedication. That's what we have to help our people to understand. That when you have multiple families and multiple situations and all of these children with one parent or other absent for no good reason other than I don't want to be bothered with you, that has to wound the spirit. Wound the spirit. I had a friend who she was playing in the yard with her siblings waiting for her father. And her uncle passed and said, well, what are you all doing out here at this hour? She said, well, Daddy taking us to the carnival. He said, no, he's at the airport. He's getting ready to go away. And he did those kind of things to spite the wife who he had left because she wouldn't sleep with him when he came to visit the children. He had moved out and gone with someone else. And so to spite her, he would hurt the children on purpose. Now, something's wrong with that scenario. We've got to be more mature than that. And so we all need to be holding each other accountable. If I see you somewhere and you with someone I know you're not married to, I need to call you to account respectfully, not in front of everybody, but pull you aside and say, look, I was at your wedding. I know this isn't your wife or husband. What's going down? We have to help each other to rise to a higher standard. We really have to. Because you cannot build a nation with this level of shaky foundation. Corrupt foundation, immoral foundation, illicit foundation, illegal. We're not going to make it like that. We've got to clean up our act as a people.
Yeah.
And we owe our children better.
Yeah. You might as well pass the offering plate because you got all the people here in my little makeshift studio. They got praise and worship going on. Motion and this and that. And
I don't need to take money from anybody. I just want them to set a godly example and encourage their friends and family members to step up to the plate. Because we can do it with the help of God, of course. We can do it. And with each other's help and support and encouragement, just like we support the athletes. And they said here in John Canoe and here in those chairs, used to be an athlete, a sprinter. It makes all the difference. So we should be cheering each other on so that we can all do better. If we touch goal in sports and swimming and stuff, we must be could touch goal with as a people of integrity. Let the tourists come here to see how we live together and let them say, like scripture said, boy, they certainly love one another. And that goes across the board.
Right.
Let that be what we're known for, along with the sun and sand and sea. Let it be the sunny disposition and the credible witness of our people.
Right. And that's going to be significant. And that's why I was going to ask you now.
I feel strongly about these things, right? I mean, that I'm not passive about this, very impassioned. Because we can do it.
We got to bring you back to
You know
to
that.
talk about some of these things in a different format. Well, same format, but different makeup in terms of maybe a panel, so we could have a this side, that side, and the other side conversation. The last Independence, I had a panel of 4. I don't know if I can do that again because that took 2 hours. But,
I could imagine. I could imagine. Yeah.
yeah,
And
we're
we
gonna
don't
do
need to be controversial. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes conversations, I think, and again, it's up to the host. I think sometimes for ratings, at least I don't know how it is in all of the shows, but I know sometimes in the States or whatever elsewhere, that
Mm-hmm.
people are intentionally aggravating to the people they're interviewing to kind of spark something. And I believe
Yeah.
that we can have a sensible orderly, respectful conversation where we listen to one another, not speaking on top of one another and whatnot. Even that is modeling inappropriate behavior. And I think it's so
Right.
important for us to teach people to listen. And as they say when I do listening workshops, to listen before you're ready with your answer. Because the last thing the person says might completely change what you were thinking. But you can't hear it if you are already thinking in your head what you're going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, give the person a chance, pause, let everybody take a moment of silence to just hear what was said and think about it. That could be the nugget that God intends. But very often we're so busy piling that no one benefits from it. And particularly if you have all kind of arguments and stuff, I just don't think that those kind of shows are helpful, at least not for me when it's adversarial. I think that we can sit down and have a mature conversation and model for our children that this is the way you speak to people and this is the way you listen and this is the way you stay quiet so that you can process. And then you respond out of the silence. You know, that's what the Mennonites do. I went to Mennonite service. The first 3/4 of the service is in perfect silence.
Wow.
And then people speak, they read a scripture, and then people speak from what they believe the Lord has said. A very different concept of worship. It was very, very interesting. And in their meetings, they work with consensus. You may say, look, I don't fully subscribe, but I'm not going to stand in the way. And then they'll move on with the decision because they feel that it's very important for the whole community to be of one mind on certain things. So you may not get as much done, but certainly you keep a spirit of harmony and peace, and there's mutual respect.
Yeah, sometimes
You
that
don't
is
just
needed more so
yeah.
than quantity.
And you
Right.
don't just block something because you could have your little clique vote against something that you know is worthwhile. You're just being disgusting, man, wicked. I mean, and who are you benefiting and blessing? Behave yourself, man. Grow up and stop acting like an adolescent who's still acting out. And that's where you have to have your healing. Other than that, you get stuck in adolescence and you act out with the same way. Now that you're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, you're still acting as if you're 14, 15, 16. And so we have to help people in our nation in also to rise to the occasion of saying, I need help. And I seem to be stuck. I need help. And to say to somebody, look, you're doing so well in that area. Teach me how you do that. And that kind of humility can take you so far. I would take teachers. I say, you got a dream team of 20 people. If they have 19 skills that you don't have, let them teach you. How do you get your notice board so quickly, so pretty? How do you get your class so quiet? How do you do? Let people teach you. And by the end of the year, you've had a free education and you're so much better than you were when you came in. So I try to get people to work together as a team and see how they can bring out the best in each other along with the children or whoever.
Yeah. So what you highlighted a lot, and people, I did not pay Reverend Palacious to say this. Pause. Think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. You heard that ringing left, right, and center in that last segment there of nuggets that she put on the table. And so as we move to this next 50 now, looking at one question, but two parts is, one, what do you see is our greatest challenge to overcome from a position of wholeness, and how do you think we should approach that? And if you could wrap that up in terms of what you would like the people to know that I might not have asked you, then we could close out with that.
But I'm going to have two answers. One is I think people need the Lord. So I think everybody needs a saving relationship with the Lord. So, I have to start there. But I think crime right now is the greatest crime and violence. There's the crime going on behind closed doors, the whole family violence thing, and there's the crime on the streets. And so I think the amount of pain and hurt and loss and grief, I think we are a grieving nation. And very often people can't express sadness, so it becomes madness, it becomes anger, fury, because of all of that hurt. So we need to be having grief seminars left, right, and center, teaching people how to cope, teaching people how to be healed, teaching people how to forgive, teaching people how to handle stress. Because with that kind of attack on your home and your personhood, and if you're thinking revenge, then it'll escalate, because there's always going to be a group of people who want to get back. So it's like the feuds that used to be in those countries where you had major civil war almost. We have a kind of civil war going on. And we don't even know who the enemy is. We don't know what the issues all are, but anybody can be an innocent victim. And then there are others who believe that they shouldn't have to work. You work for them. So they come into thief from you because, they don't want a 9 to 5. They want a 12 to 3 when they come in your house or take your car or do whatever. And so we have to help people to recognize their own skills and gifts. We have to empower them. If you're illiterate, we have to help you to learn how to read. If you don't have a skill, and this is where I believe England had, when I went to England to university, 4% went to university. Everybody else went to Polytech. I think we need TVIs all over the place, or other kinds of, where you could learn a trade, learn a skill, and make good money. I chair the National Maritime Policy Implementation Committee. We need the maritime positions on land and sea, but our children need to be qualified. Adults need to be qualified. You need to know what you need in order to accept such a position. And so if we get our children choosing subjects earlier on in school, if we can encourage them that it's not throwing out some line, maritime is a whole business, a global thing, and that we have the waters that can make us rich people. We have things swimming under the water. It's amazing what demand it is in the world. We have minerals that we didn't even know were minerals. We used to always say we didn't have any natural resources. We have a lot of natural resources, and we just need to learn how to develop them. And shipping and we are positioned in such an amazing way between North and South. So it is up to us to encourage our children to look for work in the areas where they will be productive, and they will have the money to have the lifestyle that they would like and that they deserve. So I just believe that we need to help people to know that they can be empowered to cope, and that there is an outlet, there is a business, there is something waiting for them, and to do it the right way. Then we could all get on together, truly upward, onward. We can progress together, but we cannot be preying on one another like it's a jungle. That is not going to work. We're bleeding to death as a people. We really are. Broken and bleeding on the side of the road.
Awesome. Well, folks, you've heard from the Reverend Lady herself, and all of this knowledge that is put on the table come from a lot of experience and exposure. Two things that I always say we seem to shy away from or run from, or when we see it coming, we break off running. We like to go to school, but we don't like to get exposed and have the experience of going through it ourselves. So, those things I think helps us become whole also in our liking and what we do. And so, Rev Palacious, we really would like to thank you for taking the time to share what you put on the table to us today. We hope it is value to a lot of the persons out there. I don't know if it's, sometimes people ask me these questions in the food stores afterwards, because they say, man, that show was so good I couldn't ask no question. But, we like them to ask the question so we can know what they actually thinking. But we thank you again, like we said before, and we wish to find, because you touch on some things which is on our agenda to move forward, and we got to find a way to bring you back in your busy schedule, because you touched on about 6 or 7 different committees that you did. That's just committees. That don't have nothing to do with your regular to do. And so people always say, oh, I'm tired, I like this, like that, I can't do this and stuff. But you're just an example of people high energy doing and getting things done. Because a lot of people are doing things, but they ain't getting nothing done. And, I take my hat off to you for that. And we appreciate you.
Only God's grace. Only God's grace. I'm grateful for whatever time I have left, because I'm not a spring chicken. I'm trying to make sure, like Pastor Miles Monroe says, die empty. Pour it out. But I do have balance now. When I need to take a break, go in my garden, rest my nerves, play with my grandchildren, go traveling. So I try to have a balance so that I can come back fresh and be renewed and energized to do some more for the Lord.
And that's great. Nobody could
Ever
change those and get in the way of that. Find your niche, people. Find your niche. What it is that puts you at peace. That's what I always tell people. When you're at peace, you know that you are where you ought to be.
And bring you joy as well. You want your cup to overflow, and then you can help other people as well, because joy is contagious.
Yeah. That's what I do when we have confused in the situation. First thing I do is start smiling or smile, because that's a natural reaction. People are going to smile back. Now, I got to come up with something to say next before they attack you, but they keep coming. But once again, thank you kindly, everybody in social media.
Thank you. I joy.
Love you. Let us know what you want to hear or speak subjects so that we could bring these persons on. Madam Producer, you and the praise and worship team in the back there.
We want mentors. We need mentors for these primary children.
Yeah.
So yes.
Good.
All your praise and worship team. I'm going to conscript all of them.
Yeah. Oh, Brother Howard Bowert is saying that this has been a good presentation, discussion, and testimony. Also, several good points for us to act on as good citizens of the world. Yes, very much so, Brother Barrett. Thank you kindly for watching again and listening. And Val McGinnis up there in Canada, who locks down our audience up there. Amazing lady, I am inspired by your spirit and devotion.
God is good. Only God.
Any more, Madam Producer? Because I know you will keep these people coming all night long. But we have to let the good Reverend lady go take care of those little grannies and feed her husband and all those different things that she got to do. And get in the garden. It's not dark yet.
Amen.
So thank you, Kathy. Yeah. Who's that? Okay. See you next time. Watch more videos and let us know what you want.
Enjoyed the show? Then subscribe to us for more educational and inspirational content. Ring the bell so you never miss a show. Let's change the narrative 242.